6 years ago, I made a video about plywood on the jointer and how it nicks the knives, and those nicks are still right there. I haven't actually changed the knives in all this time because as I get more and more nicks, I just move the fence over and over and over, and the knives are still pretty clean on this end. But I think it's time to sharpen them. I've got a polished piece of granite here, and this is surprisingly flat. If I put the dial indicator on here and drag it across, it just doesn't move. And with this extended way out here, if I had a bump here of just 1 thou, that dial indicator would read 2 thou. Mind you, you don't necessarily need a granite slab. It turns out this workbench top is actually also quite flat. Now, making sure that these knives are straight is not just a matter of putting the sandpaper on a flat surface and sanding against it, because the knives can also flex like this. So for example, this pretend jointer knife, I can press this flat against here and it makes contact along the whole surface. But if you look at it like this, it's actually quite crooked. And that's because the curvature like this makes a big difference. So I can get this piece of paper to touch along this whole edge if I curve it a little bit, even though it's far from straight. So that means I have to make sure that this knife stays straight in this direction. And I have these ground steel bars, and I thought I would use one of these, but before I do that, I thought I'd check it. So if I run that across along the bar, that is disappointingly not straight. I had been using this aluminum extrusion in the past to check if the knives are straight, and checking this one, it's also not straight. I was also checking this cold rolled steel bar, and it seems to have a bit of a curvature to it. Just about everything I checked on here seemed to have a curvature like that to it. And then I noticed it's not touching the granite in the middle. And if I flip it over, again, not touching the granite in the middle. So now I got a little bit suspicious. And I've had good experience with rulers like this. And if I put that ruler on here, you'll notice it's touching on the end, but in the middle it's not scraping against it. You have to push quite hard to make it touch in the middle. Same thing when I put it on this way, and the width of this ruler is very consistent. So even if it isn't straight, I don't think it would be hollow on both sides to make that effect. So now let's check this granite some more. And I'll extend this again. And the needle just doesn't move. And even if I spin this around in different directions, it is super consistent, even though I've got the measurement way out from the base. So again, it's very sensitive to variations. So what gives? So when they polish one of these things, they grind it against another hard surface, probably with some grit. And this can result in a surface that is either flat or spherical. And it turns out this is spherical concave, and if I rotate this around like so, it doesn't matter. It is very consistent, just spherical. Imagine if this was on the outside of a sphere. It doesn't matter how I spin it, it would still be the same way. So this is like an inside segment of a very large sphere. So I realized I had another chunk of granite lying around somewhere else on the property, and this one is rather heavy, so I'm just going to leave it on the trailer, but it checks out quite consistent, and more importantly, it matches the ruler, so this one is much more flat. So I've got the blade clamped to this, which is very straight. And let's see, how is that going to work? Oops, ah shit, I just cut into my sandpaper. This is not waterproof sandpaper. Different sandpaper, much finer. I'm maintaining the angle because I've got the clamps right up to the edge where it rests at the right angle. I switched back to a non-wet sandpaper because I only had the wet stuff in a fine grit, and I added this thing here to hold it at the right angle, which I can check just by holding something against the bevel right here to make sure I've got that angle right. And then to add the final micro bevel, I need to tilt that a little bit like this, which I'm doing just by adding some pieces of wood underneath here. And to check that I'm actually grinding along the whole surface here, I'm just going to put some indelible marker on here. And with a spacer added to the back, I can tell I'm grinding more towards the front edge, and I've ground off along the entire edge. And now back to the fine wet sandpaper. And looking at the edge now, it's got a nice shine to it. I cleaned all the dust out of the slot, and I picked these springs back out of my dust chute because I forgot to take these out before I turned the head. And they go in here and they push the knives back up. Some cutter heads will have jack screws underneath the knives. Thickness planers typically do not. And this cutter head came from a thickness planer. And the knife in. Now the springs push the knife up, and I need to push it down to the right level. So I found these aluminum extrusions, which are very straight, and in the past I would have just weighed these down, but I just realized I could stick a magnet in here, and that really locks them down to the table. Except the knives actually need to come up a bit higher than the outfeed table, because the knives always cut a little bit less than their high, because the wood yields a little bit, and so if it doesn't cut as high as the outfeed table, the wood gradually rides up until the depth of cut becomes 0. So I need to have the knives about 0.1 millimeters or about 4 or 5 thou higher than the outfeed table, which just happens to be the thickness of this sheet of paper. Now I just need to make sure the knife is exactly above the shaft, so it's at its highest point. And then I can screw these screws back out, which tightens it in. Now with them all a little bit snug, I'm just going to let that knife come up a little bit again and back down. There, it's come up. And now back down just to be on the safe side. I could possibly put a magnet in here as well to lift the knives if I'd lost the springs. Okay, now the final tightening. And one final check of the knife height. It's supposed to drag this a limited distance across the table as the knives come up. And if you're planing unknown random wood, it helps to wire brush it, just in case there's some grit on it. And this is how it came off the jointer. Nice and straight and flat, even a little bit shiny. Okay, not as flat as the granite, but pretty flat. Now, just to answer this, because I've had this question before, if when you're planing, the stock starts to lift off of the infeed table like this, gradually as you move it across, even though you've already straightened it, that's because your knives are too low and it's just riding up on the outfeed table, which it is right now because, well, the knives are too low because the jointer's not running. And setting the knives higher than the outfeed table does cause a little bit of snipe, which I can feel is right here. The way the table is so close to the head, the snipe is very close to the end, so it doesn't matter that much.